Hello. So we're here to talk to you today a little bit about developing student empathy in a study abroad program. So this course that we'll be discussing took place in the summer and fall of 2019, where we took students to northern Italy to study animal production in the summer of 2019, and then those same students participated in a semester-long course in the fall of 2019. So the study was completed by myself, JC Wickenhauser, a graduate student in the Department of Animal Sciences, along with Dr. Elizabeth Karcher, who is an assistant professor as well as in the Department of Animal Sciences. So some background information before we get into the study itself is that we know moving forward it's going to be essential to create globally competent students that are graduating in the field of agriculture. So by 2050, we know that the world population is expected to be about 9.8 billion people, which is a rather large jump from where we are at right now as a population. And so with this, agriculture students need to be more culturally literate and have the capacity to communicate. With a growing world population comes with an increase in globalization in industries around the world, especially with agriculture. Agriculture itself is already so globally that our students need to have that increase of global competence so that they can be culturally literate and be able to interact with people in their workplace, in their office, around the world really that they'll need to in the coming years. So some things that we're going to target that we know can help increase these global competencies are things like cultural self-awareness, communication, empathy, curiosity, and attitudes. And these topics have been discussed in literature in multiple places that we'll discuss on how we use these in our study. So a big combination of those words that I just mentioned, like cultural self-awareness, comes from this idea of intercultural competence. And as a whole, intercultural competence is the ability to shift cultural perspective and appropriately adapt behavior to cultural differences and commonalities. So what this means is can people be placed in another culture and be able to look at things from a different point of view from their own? Are people able to talk, work with, communicate, all of these things with somebody who's from a different cultural perspective than their own? And we know that intercultural competence is a lifelong process. So this means that somebody as a young adult can start this and continue to learn and grow in intercultural competence throughout their lifespan. And another thing we know about intercultural competence that makes it a little unique is that it has to be intentionally addressed. And we can address that in multiple ways, either in education, in the workplace, in the classroom, in online workshops, whatever it may be. But it has to be intentionally addressed because this isn't something that just comes naturally. While people that have more experiences abroad and with different cultures may increase themselves in a little ways, to increase it as a whole, it really needs to be intentionally addressed. So, intercultural competence really goes hand in hand with this idea of essential skill development. And essential skills are a set of skills that we may have heard in the past referred to as soft skills. And these are things like communication, teamwork, problem solving, and leadership skills. And agricultural employers are seeking students with these developed and essential skills. It's important to note that a lot of educators and students believe that technical skills are still important, but agricultural employers really think that essential skills are an important skill for graduates to bring into the workplace after they're finished with their education. And so the development of things like intercultural empathy can be applied to these essential skills. So a lot of the essential skills that we see in intercultural skills can overlap. So as we increase these intercultural skills and intercultural empathy, we in turn have a better chance of increasing these essential skills that employers want to see, therefore making our agricultural graduates more employable. And then we know skills like intercultural empathy can be learned and developed with intentional curriculums in a classroom, which is what we're going to focus on for our study. So the objective of our present study is to explore and describe intercultural development and empathy development before and after participation in a combined learning community and study abroad experience. So for our study, as I said, we took students to northern Italy to study animal production. A unique aspect of our study is that we combined two high impact practices of a study abroad course and a learning community. So the study abroad portion took place in July of 2019, where 9 students all went to northern Italy for 10 days to study animal production and interact with industry professionals in Italy. And after they were done with that, all of the same 9 students came back and completed a semester long course together where they focused on things like international agriculture and intercultural development in a classroom, as well as being in a learning community together. So the fact that we combined two high impact practices gave us the best chance we can to maximize these increased skills we're looking for in these students.
So the
So,
students,
So the learning community provides a lot of resources for out of classroom activities. So while in a learning community, students are able to interact with other students and faculty that share similar interests as themselves. So for our students in a learning community for this study, we're all interested in international agriculture and animal production in some aspect, which is how they came together in this learning community. So they learn with being in a learning community. They have the opportunity to live in residence halls with other learning community members and really be able to build that bond outside of a classroom and making them a stronger knit community in themselves. And they also have the ability to learn about community and university resources that they may not have had access to or known about previously to being in this learning community. And throughout the semester, they had multiple chances to network with the industry through professional development visits in the classroom, as well as different field trips and tours they were able to take throughout the semester.
So all of the methods that we use to try to address our two objectives were all IRB approved by Purdue University. We really wanted to use the quantitative data that we could collect from the intercultural development inventory from our 9 students and use that data to try to get overall total intercultural development across our whole program. So we had the students engage in the IDI 3 different time points throughout the semester. So the first time they were exposed to the IDI was 1 week prior to the international experience in Italy. Then 1 week into the fall 2019 semester, which would have been about 3 weeks from their time they came home from Italy, they took T2 or the second time of the IDI. Finally, at the end of the fall semester, we had them take during week 15 T3 or the very last IDI. We also were really interested in trying to use qualitative assessment and quantitative assessment to better understand empathy development within our group of students. For this, we utilized the AAC&U rubrics, and I'm going to get in a little bit today with you about the methods that we tried to use to address empathy development. We did ask students to complete with other things within the course, but 7 reflective assignments that were all designed to deliberately try to increase their overall development. We assigned or we chose these particular assignments because they were right around the area that our students were in on the intercultural development continuum, which was primarily in minimization or low minimization at the start of the international experience and after the international experience in T2. So of the 7 assignments, each student received their own intercultural development plan or IDP. And we really utilized this plan throughout the semester so students could make their own goals. And then in assignment 4, the IDI or IDP plan number 2, we then asked students to reflect where they were at so far this semester. Did they reach their goals? What could they do differently throughout the remaining weeks of the semester? And the very last assignment, which occurred during week 15, was another reflective assignment where students were asked to really look back on what were they successful at with their IDP, what did they learn, what would they still like to do in the future related to intercultural development. And the IDP we found was a really great way to really individualize some of the assignments for our students. Now, the other assignments we used throughout the semester, the majority of those we selected from the Hubicle, and we selected those for students, like I already said, that were in minimization. So these included a Who I Am poem, Alpha Beta reflection, which was an activity that we did within the classroom, but then they had to reflect on that activity, and then Danger of a Single Story. We also added our own assignment, which was a visit to an ethnic market that students needed to do on their own about halfway through our fall semester. So we want to focus first on the T1 and T3 results of the Intercultural Development Inventory. And we're going to show these to you initially as our group results. So we have our 9 students, and then we have their T1, T3. We're not including their T2 on this because it wasn't any different from T1 and T3. So at T1, as a group, the majority of our students were in minimization at a 91 on the Intercultural Development Continuum. We did see that at T3 there was a small increase of approximately 6 from 91 to almost 97, still in minimization on the IDC. Now, this wasn't a statistically significant difference that we saw between T1, T3, as well as it was not significant if we look at a 7-point increase that we consider to be significant on the intercultural development continuum. So if, as a group, we didn't see much growth at all using just the results of the intercultural development inventory. But I want to share with you a little bit more about our individual results because I feel it's good to have the group results, but we also need to look at what are individual students doing. Now, I will caution you with our data, we don't want to overgeneralize because we did only have 9 students that were in this sample group that we had for the course. But I will show you here, we have the stage of the student, denial down to adaptation, T1, what percent of our students fell within that range, and then T3 highlighted here, what percent were in that area on the continuum at the end of the semester. So prior to the international experience, almost 80% of our students on the course were in minimization at this time. And we had one student that was exhibiting on the IDI of denial. When we look at T3, we see shifts in where our students went during this time. So the majority of our students, almost 78%, at the end of the semester fell within both minimization and acceptance. So we had growth with some students. We also had growth with students moving from denial to polarization. When we looked across all the students on the IDI, we didn't see any students regress on the IDI. If there was growth that was achieved within an individual student, this was growth that was moving forward within the IDI. So this reached our first objective of trying to look at total intercultural development using the IDI as a quantitative tool to see what movement we saw within our study population. The next thing we wanted to look at was assessing empathy. And this was the first time that both JC and myself used the AAC&U rubrics to try to identify or assess empathy development. So our initial approach was more of a quantitative one. We trained 3 different reviewers, and we did this by holding 3 different 1-hour training sessions. And during each of these training sessions, we would have sample assignments that we would have everybody read through, and then we would talk about, everybody would read through them and assign the different words or different terms a number of 1 through 4 based on the empathy scale on the AAC&U rubric. Upon doing this, then you would give a total score for the entire paper, and then we would look and we would see what the inter-rater reliability between all of our scores were on the paper, all the reviewers' scores. We repeated this 3 times because each time that we did this, we were getting fairly poor inter-rater reliability. So after working on this for several months, JC and I stepped back and we said, is there another way that we could approach this information or to get this empathy assessment with using something maybe that's a little bit less quantitative with the rubrics? So we're currently working on trying to use deductive coding with the rubrics to try to better assess empathy development across those 7 assignments with those 9 students. So we're working on looking at key phrases that are in the rubrics 1 through 4 and trying to identify patterns in different phrases that are across our different assignments that the students completed. So this was the first time, like I've said, that we ever tried developing empathy. So we wanted to share it with you. We don't have the results today. We're still working on those, but we wanted to share a little bit more about maybe some of the struggles or how we had to adapt our methods in order to try to get at some different way of assessing empathy within our population.
So to wrap up our study, as I mentioned at the beginning, is that we know the development of globally competent agriculture students is going to be critical. As our world population continues to grow and globalization within agriculture itself continues to increase, we're going to need students that have those intercultural and essential skills so they can interact with people from a lot of different cultures that maybe in the past decades they haven't had to think about. So we know that study abroad programming can be a high impact practice to develop intercultural competencies. That's been shown multiple times in research. The fact that we combine 2 high impact practices of study abroad programming and learning communities just allowed us to maximize the growth of these skills that we were looking for in students. And by combining these 2, we gave students many more experiences than they would have had with either or with having none of them. And as Dr. Karcher mentioned, there are multiple approaches that we can use to assess and understand data. We tried one way and we weren't getting anywhere and it was not working for us. So we were really lucky that we were able to find another way that we could use to assess this data in a different way so that we can look at it and still have results from the study that we started with at the beginning.
So I'd like to acknowledge Purdue Sylmar Center for providing funds for our program through the mini grant, 2019 mini grant. We also want to thank all the staff at Sylmar for all the time they've taken with us on this project, meeting with us individually, helping us train reviewers. All of that support's really been fundamental in moving our project forward. And at this time, we would ask for questions. I know this is a little bit different with the recording. So both JC and myself have included our email address at the very start of this presentation. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer anything. We're also planning on having a manuscript submitted in the next couple of months that will include the deductive coding of the empathy. So if you're interested in learning any more about that or the process that we went through, please reach out. We're happy to answer any questions. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to our presentation.